My name is Hannah Collins. I am 30 years old and I live in Manchester, England. I always believed I had built a stable and happy life with my husband Daniel and my best friend Sophie, who had been part of my world for more than 10 years. Sophie was the kind of friend who knew everything about me, from my insecurities to my dreams, and I trusted her in a way I trusted very few people in my life. She was there for every important moment in my relationship with Daniel, from our early dating days to our wedding, and even after we got married, she often visited our home and spent time with us as a couple, and it always felt natural to have her around, like she was part of our family. At the same time, my marriage with Daniel felt steady, at least from the outside. We had routines, shared plans for the future, and what I believed was mutual understanding. But looking back, there were small changes that I did not pay enough attention to at first. Daniel started becoming more distant, spending more time on his phone and less time talking about his day. He would often sit in silence, scrolling late at night, and sometimes step out of the room to take calls he said were work-related, and I trusted him because I never had a reason not to. Sophie also began to act slightly different around me. She would sometimes seem distracted or nervous when I asked simple questions, and there were moments when she avoided eye contact for no clear reason, but I brushed it off, thinking maybe she was going through something personal and did not want to burden me with it. As time went on, these small changes started to form a pattern that I could feel but not yet understand. There was a growing distance between all three of us that I could not explain, but I chose to ignore it because I did not want to believe that something could be wrong in both my marriage and my friendship. At the same time, I kept telling myself that I was overthinking, and that stress from work or life was affecting how I interpreted things. But deep down, there was a quiet unease that would not go away. One evening, I remember Daniel leaving his phone on the kitchen counter while he went upstairs, and as I walked past it, a notification lit up the screen showing Sophie's name, followed by a heart emoji. In that moment, everything inside me stopped, because it felt like the world had suddenly shifted in a direction I was not prepared for. I stood there staring at the screen, trying to convince myself there was a harmless explanation, but the feeling in my chest told me otherwise. I did not open the message, and I did not confront him at that moment, but something changed inside me. From that point forward, I began to look at everything differently. Every late night call, every sudden excuse, every moment of hesitation from Sophie started to feel like pieces of a puzzle that I had not wanted to put together. And even though I still tried to hold on to normality, a part of me already knew that the life I thought was safe and stable might not be what it seemed, and that single notification became the beginning of a truth I was no longer able to unseen. After seeing the message notification on Daniel's phone, everything in my life began to feel different. Even though I tried to act normal on the outside, inside my mind was constantly replaying that single moment over and over again. I told myself that there could be an innocent explanation, that maybe Sophie had sent something casual, or that I had misunderstood what I saw, but deep down I knew my instincts were not letting me forget it. From that day forward, I started paying closer attention to both of them without letting them realize that anything had changed. I watched the way Daniel behaved whenever his phone buzzed, and how quickly he would turn the screen away from me when I was nearby. I also noticed that he started stepping out of rooms more often to take calls, and when I asked simple questions about his day, his answers became shorter and less detailed. Sophie, on the other hand, began to visit less frequently, and when she did come around, she seemed different, more cautious in her tone, and sometimes overly careful about what she said. Around Daniel and me together, it felt like there was an invisible wall forming between us that I could not fully understand, but could definitely feel. I started to question every interaction, replaying conversations in my head, trying to find something I might have missed or misunderstood. At work, I found it difficult to concentrate because my thoughts were always drifting back to home and the strange tension I was sensing between my husband and my Best friend, I confided in a colleague one afternoon without giving too much detail, just saying that I felt something was off in my personal life and needed someone to talk to. It helped a little, but the confusion and anxiety still stayed with me. When I came home early one day without telling Daniel, I noticed how quickly he changed his behavior when he saw me, as if he had been caught off guard. And Sophie, who was supposed to be out of town, suddenly canceled plans she had made with me earlier that week, saying she was not feeling well, but something about the timing felt too convenient for me to ignore. I began to quietly look for anything that could confirm my suspicions without directly accusing either of them. I checked shared bills' location history when possible and even paid attention to small details like how long they took to respond to messages or how often their schedules seemed to overlap in ways that did not make sense. The emotional pressure of living like this was exhausting, because I was still trying to act like everything was normal while internally I felt like I was losing stability in the one place I thought was safest. One evening I found a receipt in Daniel's jacket pocket from a hotel I had never heard him mention, and the date on it matched one of the days Sophie had told me she was busy with family matters. That discovery hit me harder than anything else, because it was no longer just suspicion, it was something tangible that connected both of them in a way I could not easily dismiss. I remember sitting alone after that moment, trying to process everything while feeling both shocked and strangely calm, as if a part of me had already started preparing for the truth, even if I had not fully accepted it yet. And from that point forward, I knew I could not continue pretending that nothing was happening, because the signs were no longer small and my life was quietly shifting into something I could not ignore anymore. After finding the hotel receipt, I knew I could no longer rely on doubt or confusion, because what I was seeing was starting to form a clear pattern that could not be ignored anymore. But instead of confronting Daniel or Sophie immediately, I made a decision to stay calm and gather proof, so that whatever truth I uncovered would be undeniable and not something they could easily deny or twist in their favor. I began by carefully observing their routines even more closely than before, paying attention to the smallest inconsistencies in their schedules and behavior. I noticed that Daniel became more protective of his phone than ever, keeping it face down or taking it with him even when moving around the house, and Sophie started avoiding situations where all three of us would be together for long periods of time, almost as if she was trying to reduce any chance of slipping up emotionally or behaviorally. I also started checking shared digital information more carefully, including location history where possible and timing of messages, which slowly revealed overlaps that did not match the explanations they had been giving me. Over time, a pattern started to emerge, showing that they had been in the same places during times they claimed to be elsewhere, and this realization made my stomach feel heavy, because it confirmed that my fears were not just emotional reactions but based on something real. As painful as that truth was, I still forced myself to continue gathering information, because I needed a complete picture before making any move. Emotionally, it was extremely difficult, because I kept remembering all the years I had trusted both of them completely, and how many moments of closeness now felt tainted by suspicion. I would sit alone at night, replaying conversations and memories, trying to identify when things might have started to change, but nothing ever felt clear enough to point to a single moment of betrayal. Instead, it felt like a slow, gradual shift that I had failed to notice until it was already too late. During this time, I also began emotionally distancing myself from them without revealing anything, because I did not want to risk them changing their behavior. If they suspected I was watching them more closely, I would respond normally in conversations, laugh when appropriate, and maintain appearances, even though inside I felt like I was living a completely different reality from the one they saw. One evening, while reviewing everything I had collected so far, I realized that the evidence was strong enough to confirm that their interactions were not accidental or innocent, and that they had been coordinating their Meetings in ways that were deliberately hidden from me. This realization was painful beyond anything I had experienced before because it meant that two of the people I trusted most had been actively deceiving me while maintaining normal relationships with me at the same time. Despite the emotional weight of this truth, I knew I still needed something undeniable, something that could not be explained away as coincidence or misunderstanding. So I continued gathering until one day I found myself in a situation where I saw them together in a place they had both told me they would never be at the same time, and in that moment everything became clear without any need for further explanation. I stood there silently, realizing that all the pieces had finally come together and that I was no longer dealing with suspicion but with confirmed betrayal. And from that point forward, I understood that the next step in my life would not be about discovery anymore, but about deciding what I was going to do with the truth I had uncovered. After confirming everything I had suspected about Daniel and Sophie, I realized that confronting them in anger would not give me the closure or truth I needed, because they could still deny everything or twist the situation in a way that made me doubt myself again. So instead, I decided to take control of the situation carefully and plan my next steps with full clarity. I spent several days organizing every piece of evidence I had collected, including messages, timestamps, receipts, and location overlaps, and arranged them in a way that clearly showed the timeline of events without confusion or gaps. During this process, I felt a strange mix of emotional pain and focus, because while it hurt deeply to go through every detail again, it also gave me a sense of purpose and direction that kept me from falling apart completely. I also made sure to prepare myself emotionally for what would happen next, because I knew that once I revealed everything, there would be no going back, and my relationship with both of them would be permanently changed. I chose to wait for the right moment where both Daniel and Sophie would be present without expecting anything unusual from me. I invited them under the simple excuse of having a small evening together at my home, something that would not raise suspicion and would allow me to control the environment around me. As the evening approached, I acted completely normal, cooking, preparing drinks, and engaging in casual conversation, even though inside I could feel my heart racing and my thoughts focused on what was about to happen. Both of them arrived acting as if everything was fine. Daniel relaxed and familiar, Sophie slightly cautious, but still trying to appear normal. As the evening went on, I observed their behavior carefully, noticing how they interacted even in small, subtle ways that now confirmed everything I already knew. There were moments where they exchanged looks that carried meaning only they understood, and every small detail strengthened my resolve. When the moment felt right and the conversation reached a natural pause, I stood up and calmly told them that there was something important I needed to show them. At first, they seemed confused but not alarmed, thinking it was something ordinary. But as I began presenting the evidence piece by piece, the atmosphere in the room began to change. Immediately, I showed them the timeline of messages, the hotel receipt, the location overlaps, and the patterns that connected everything together without leaving room for misinterpretation. The more I revealed, the quieter the room became, until even the smallest sounds felt loud. Daniel started trying to explain himself, but his words lacked clarity and confidence. Sophie avoided eye contact, and her expression shifted from nervousness to panic as the reality of what was happening sank in. They both attempted to interrupt or justify certain details, but every explanation they offered only made the situation more obvious rather than less. As the truth unfolded completely in front of them, the emotional tension in the room became overwhelming, because there was no longer any space for denial or misunderstanding. Everything had been laid out clearly, and there was nothing left to hide or defend themselves with. I remember standing there feeling both heartbreak and strength at the same time, because while everything I believed in had been destroyed, I also finally had confirmation that I was not imagining things and that my instincts had been right all along. As silence filled the room, I knew that whatever came next would permanently change all of our lives, and that the moment of truth had finally arrived with no way to reverse it anymore. After revealing everything to Daniel and Sophie, the atmosphere in my life changed completely, because there was no longer any space left for denial, confusion, or hidden tension. Everything that had been building up for weeks finally collapsed into a single undeniable truth. And what followed was a painful silence that felt heavier than any argument I had ever experienced. Daniel tried to speak at first, but his words were broken and inconsistent, as if he could not find a way to explain something that no longer had an explanation. Sophie stood quietly, avoiding eye contact, her expression filled with shock and regret, but neither of them could undo what had already been exposed. I remember feeling a strange mix of emptiness and clarity, as if a long, exhausting weight had finally been lifted, even though the pain of betrayal was still fully present in my chest. In the hours that followed, there was no resolution, no dramatic apology that could fix what had been broken, only the reality that my marriage and my closest friendship had both ended in the same moment. Daniel eventually left the house without much discussion, taking a few belongings and leaving behind a silence that felt unfamiliar but strangely peaceful. Sophie attempted to reach out in the following days, sending messages that tried to explain her actions, but I could not bring myself to respond, because anything she said no longer changed the reality of what had happened. Instead, I chose silence for myself, as a way to protect what was left of my emotional stability. In the days that followed, I spent a lot of time alone, reflecting on how I had missed the signs for so long and how trust had blinded me to changes that were happening right in front of me. I thought about every moment I had ignored my instincts, and every time I had chosen to believe comfort over truth, even when something inside me was warning otherwise. Slowly, over time, the intensity of pain began to shift into acceptance, not forgiveness, but understanding that my life had changed permanently and that I could not return to what it once was. I focused on rebuilding myself, starting with small routines and simple goals that helped me regain a sense of control over my daily life. Work became an important anchor for me, and so did reconnecting with people who had always supported me quietly in the background without judgment or pressure. There were still difficult days when memories would return unexpectedly, but instead of breaking me, they gradually became reminders of what I had survived. As time passed, I began to see the situation not only as a betrayal, but also as a turning point that forced me to face reality and rebuild my identity without depending on people who had not been honest with me. In the end, I realized that exposing the truth had not just ended my relationship with Daniel and Sophie, it had also freed me from a life built on uncertainty and hidden deception. And while the process was painful beyond words, it allowed me to step into a future where I no longer had to question my reality or doubt my instincts, and that understanding became the foundation for everything I would choose to build next.